Greetings, this is going to be an off-the-cuff video, but the video came about because of this discussion that was being had on one of John the Other's videos, and there was a traditional conservative who was kind of spouting out the usual talking points about how feminism is allied with the left and so on and so forth, and nobody really disputes that. I mean, feminism is, it is, I wouldn't say it is, but it falls in line and feeds on and off of left-leaning ideology, but there are reasons for that. Now, what one gentleman I got in discussion, well, he didn't claim anything, but he didn't believe my statements when I said, well, yeah, that's because women are collectivistic by nature. They vote in that way. They vote to maximize their security. They have in-group preferences and so on and so forth. Now, all of this stuff that's been pretty well documented by now and is pretty well known. I also cited the fact that all these people that are always going on about smaller government, smaller government, smaller government, they don't want to acknowledge, or if they do, they don't want to acknowledge it too loudly, that women's suffrage contributed immensely to government growth. So I'll post a link to this paper. It's a pretty detailed research paper. You can read it yourself if you're interested. So figure 2 graphs. The simple relationship between the granting of women's suffrage and per capita state government expenditures and revenue. The bottom axis is the same as that used in figure 1, and it sets year 0 as the fiscal year during which women first voted in any state. While some caution is needed in reading this graph, since nothing else is being controlled for, the figure shows that state governments grew dramatically. I'll repeat that. The figure shows that state governments grew dramatically when women were given the right to vote. State government expenditures declined for 4 of the 5 years before women began voting, and expenditures reached their lowest point immediately before women were given the right to vote. Alternatively, John Lott, conservative American economist, using data from 1870 to 1940, Lott and Larry Kenney studied how state government expenditures and revenue changed in 48 state governments after women obtained the right to vote. Women were able to vote in 29 states before women's suffrage and the adoption of the 19th Amendment of the Constitution. Lott stated that women's suffrage coincided with immediate increases in state government expenditures and revenue and more liberal voting patterns for federal representatives, and these effects continue growing over time as more women took advantage of the franchise. I mean, nothing new. This is all, Barbaros has talked about this. I've talked about this. Even Girl Rights Watch talked about this. So this is nothing new. So we know that political franchisement, or political franchise rather, for women gave them the power to exercise their wishes and their desires in the governmental scene, in the political scene. And this is what we've gotten. There are many people that argue women should never have been given the right to vote. I think it's a moot point unless we create a time machine. And I'm not for removing the right to vote, and I want to get into that in a bit. But I mean, these are the facts. Women are naturally inclined towards big government. They want big government security. They vote almost exclusively for their own interests, no matter what fallout there might be for other interest groups, and so on and so forth. Okay. My issue, if you will, with the tradcons and even libertarians who are constantly going on about these things is that they don't want to even look at some of the causes. Now, as much as I'm inclined towards libertarianism, they often don't have a realistic perspective on things. They think that people are blank slates. They think that there's no such thing as women, that there are no such thing as races preferring their own race, and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of this I think is stupid, but it nonetheless is factual in the sense that there seems to be clear evidence to suggest that races prefer their own type, generally speaking. There are always exceptions, and I consider myself one of them. I have friends across all racial profiles, and I think focusing on race and banding together on the basis of race instead of good ideas is idiotic and primitive, but that's the way most people function, unfortunately. So that's an obstacle. And moving to the female aspect of things, yeah, it's clear. I mean, we know that women prefer themselves to others, and they vote in their own interests, and they vote for the sake of securing their interests and to increase their security, and so on and so forth. Okay. Libertarians and right-leaning people don't want to acknowledge that biology, human nature, has a role in this. They just want to kind of state it out in the open and not try to look for causal factors. Okay, I just cited some causal factors. Now, the hard reality, unfortunately, to the dismay of many, is that if these people really wish to bring about a libertarian or a right-wing or whatever you want to call it, utopia, and I suppose I'm being a bit hyperbolic, or less government, if they really wanted to shrink the government, you know what you would have to do, people who want to shrink the government at all costs? You would, at the point of a gun, or at least by some means of force, have to remove the right to vote for women. You would have to literally get rid of all of their political and societal privileges, and we would have to backstep it about 200 years. And women literally would have to be chained to the stove and the household. Not only with respect to the political stuff, I mean, you would have to, like I said, get rid of their political freedoms, get rid of their right to vote. You would have to get rid of their societal freedoms, and so on and so forth. But the other things, that's something I've talked about very frequently, the mechanization effect, which includes birth control, all the innovations that have come about due to tremendous bursts of technological growth. You would need to, well, you couldn't just, I guess you could destroy that technology, but it's unlikely. You'd have to make it inaccessible. For example, you would have to make it illegal for women to gain access to birth control, at the very least. All these things. You would simply have to put tons of restrictions on the results of the mechanization effect, all the products of modern innovation and technology, in addition to curtailing, if not completely restricting, all political freedoms that women enjoy. You would quite literally have, I guess, a patriarchy in that sense. And probably a harsher one than had ever existed before. That would be the price to pay. Now, let me just say, I don't want that. I don't want to take any rights away from women. I want them to do whatever they want. I'm pretty much indifferent, or rather I'm neutral about the subject. But for those who advocate shrinking government at all costs and rant on about how feminism is essentially a left-wing philosophy, well, maybe. I think it's weaponized female nature, and I've made many videos to demonstrate this point. I'm simply pointing out the price you would have to pay. Now, people on the right and people who call themselves libertarians, generally speaking, don't address that issue, and if they do address it, I don't think they're willing to do that. I do happen to be acquainted with a few people who would refer themselves as monarchists, or it's just a different term for Hobbesian. Thomas Hobbes, as you know, in his huge work called Leviathan, advocated for a oppressive, tyrannical ruler to hold the bad nature of man in check. He thought that was the only way to go. So too do modern Hobbesians believe this as well. And as much as I disagree with them, and I don't envision a Hobbesian world, I don't want to live in that world, the Hobbesians, at least, that I know, would be willing to, at the point of a gun or forcibly remove the collective rights of women and restrict their access to technology. Of course, that would be literally tyranny, but Hobbesians argue for tyranny is the only way we can have a functioning society, in their view. I don't really agree with them, but this is not the time to talk about that. It's a separate issue. My point simply being that, in contrast to libertarians and shrink the government right-wing people, Hobbesians say, yeah, we'll take away the right to vote, we'll take away their political freedoms, we'll take away everything, just so we can have a functioning society. Of course, my idea I expressed to a large extent, not entirely. I'll be following that up with a video sometime in the future, an escape velocity of a society driven by ideas, particularly where males capitalize on for themselves and for the sake of humanity, their best assets, their minds. And this doesn't really fit anywhere on the spectrum of Hobbesianism or libertarianism or right-wingism or whatever. But I just wanted to make this video to illustrate the point, or rather the price, that people would have to be willing to pay, particularly the men who advocate for smaller government. Women are always, generally speaking, not all of them, but most women, generally speaking, are going to vote for bigger government. They're going to vote for government security. And it was cited, interestingly enough, in that research paper, that women, even married women, during I believe it was the '88 elections, didn't vote for. Sorry, not the '88. It was for the early '90s. Sorry, the early '90s. Bob Dole. Even though they were married, because of a general feeling, this was the interpretation of insecurity. Their friends were getting divorced. They never knew. They were worried about their security, what might happen to them. Right? And so this is how powerful this I'm going to vote left, I'm going to vote for big government feeling is. Even if they're married and in reasonably secure marriages, if they have a sort of ominous feeling, they still will vote Democrat. There are a copious amount of data on this. And yeah, as I said, copious amounts of data, it's all there. So my question to people who are right-leaning or libertarians is, how are you going to shrink the government without putting severe restrictions, if not completely restricting women's political and societal freedom? I'm not sure. I don't want to do that. But if that's what you want, if you want a smaller government with all the benefits, that's what you're going to have to do. And it seems to me, I do not agree with monarchists or Hobbesians, but it seems to me Hobbesians are the only ones who are willing to do that. I mean, I don't agree with them, but at least they're saying, yeah, that's the only way we could get a smaller government society is by just taking away all the freedoms from women. Okay, fair enough. At least they're being intellectually honest about it. Anyway, a bit of a rant, admittedly, but these guys who are always ranting about smaller government, I'd like a smaller government too, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen as long as women have societal freedom and political franchise, and I don't want to take that away from them. In fact, I think it's a fascinating opportunity to observe human nature, female nature, their biological drives, and how they manifest themselves in the political scene. But anyway, that's all I have to say about this, and I'm kind of working on a new video. And as always, thanks for watching. Talk to you at a later date. Seuss Willie.